Okay, so I'm about to talk about things that I am not the subject matter expert in. And I'm going to talk about one person who is a very learned student of philosophy, and one person who is a bumbling layman at philosophy, but might have stumbled upon a valid argument against the learned student. First, the learned student. He is a good friend of mine named Charles, the Abusive Antitheist. Recently, he made a video on his favorite argument for the non-existence of God, which is the argument from divine hiddenness. Excuse me. So, if none of you know what the argument from divine hiddenness is, just Google it real quick. It's a set of premises and a conclusion that, are trying to prove the non-existence of God. And I'm going to say right now, just strap yourselves in, because at least one of you is about to get severely mind-fucked by this train of thought. Because his argument for the non-existence of God is a good one, but it is really, it's better used against the monotheistic and Abrahamic religions where God demands belief in him, than just a general sense of God. It doesn't really work against deists, but and that's because it really depends on the definition of God, and it depends on the definition of the characteristics of God, which I'm about to talk about when I bring up InventorGorilla, who basically just stumbled upon the argument against the argument from reasonable non-belief by bringing up a Calvinist quote from the Bible. And he read from Romans chapter 8, I believe it's verse 28 through 30. And in it says that God has determined beforehand who was going to be good, and he's prepared them. And you can find many different quotes in the Bible that support the Calvinist or determinist line of thinking that God knows beforehand who's going to hell and who's going to heaven. In fact, there are many more verses that support that line of reasoning than there are verses that support free will. But when we take InventorGorilla's stance there, and when he's asking what does that verse mean to us in his video, to me, it's a difference in the definition of God and his nature. Now, I see a very large contradiction in the Bible between free will and determinism, but that's okay with me because I don't believe anything in the Bible, so I don't have to resolve this contradiction. I can just discard the Bible as bullshit. But for InventorGorilla, it seems that he's selected a church to attend that has chosen one side of this contradiction and completely tossed out free will. Now, this free will versus determinism argument has a lot to do with the argument from reasonable non-belief, in that if you keep changing the nature of God, you can come across certain definitions of God that are not disproved by the arguments from non-belief. Now, if you were to take Schellenberg's premises, his first premise is, if there is a God, he is perfectly loving. Now, how are you defining perfectly loving? Because if you look at Inventor Gorilla's idea of who God is creating people and knowing before he even creates them that they're going to end up in hell. Now, some might say that that isn't loving, and some might say that if you don't think that that's loving, you just don't understand God's love. God still loves the people that he's sending to hell. But it does seem rather strange that God would be punishing people or planning to punish people that he's going to create just for the purpose of turning into the type of people that go to hell. So, right there, Schellenberg's premise number one comes into question. If you are of the Calvinist, determinist, Inventor Gorilla, weird church style person. And you can back up those weird notions with, more verses in the Bible than you can free will. Now, if you were to look at some of the more evolved forms of the argument from non-belief, like Drange's argument, which I don't know how far AbusiveAntitheist really followed the arguments from non-belief, because I think, and this is a personal statement about Charles, I think that he likes the argument from non-belief because it takes away the culpability of him in his relationship with his family, because it's not his fault if he's trying to believe in God and he can't. Because if God is creating people that can't believe in him, then God doesn't exist if he wants everyone to believe in him. There's logical inconsistencies there, but I think the real reason why Charles is in love with the notion of the argument from the reasonable non-belief is because of guilt that stems from, you hurt your fucking family when you tell them, I don't believe in your God anymore. And if it's not your fault that you don't believe in your God, in their God, because their God doesn't exist, it seems a bit sexy, And I could be off about this, but it seems to me that Charles has come to his feelings of non-belief in God from a much different angle than I did. Anyways, on to the more evolved notions of the argument from non-belief. If you look at Drange's works, whether or not you are guilty for not believing in God, the culpability part is removed. So it's not as sexy to people who want to defend themselves from the guilt of not believing in God. But if you look at Drange's premise number one, it says, if God exists, God wants all humans to believe that God exists before they die. Now, if you look at the way that Inventor Gorilla sees God and can back up his notions of seeing God that way with Bible verses, God is creating people to go straight to hell and never believe in God, during their lives. Or they might believe in God for a little while and then not believe in him. But God is the one that sent them on that path and controlled all the environmental factors that led them on their way to hell. And God knew before they were born that they were going to hell. So, Drange's premise one is therefore incorrect. If God exists, he does not want all people to believe that he exists before they die. So, what I'm getting at here is, Inventor Gorilla, bumbling, stumbling moron of a theologian, okay? He may have the argument that refutes abusive anti-theists' learned, scholarly arguments for the non-existence of God. Total fucking mindfuck.